you guys all doing? Welcome into the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga, live today on April 19th to wrap up the week, to kickstart your weekend with some more NFL conversations and topics on today's episode. We're going to start it off with more on Bill Belichick, carrying on from what we discussed yesterday to end yesterday's show, now carrying into Bill Belichick and discussing three teams that have been reported as his possible favorite places to coach in 2025 if those jobs become available and if he gets the opportunity to do that. Also, later on in the show, Tom Brady mentioned last time on the Deep Cut podcast when we had that conversation, he was asked about which quarterback he thinks could be the next quarterback to win his first Super Bowl. I saw that. I'm going to react to it, and I'm also going to give my top 5 list of who I believe will be the next quarterbacks most likely to win their next Super Bowl. And then to end the show, we're going to talk about the Washington Commanders, a bit of an unorthodox method to their top 30 visit, bringing in a lot of prospects at the same time, a lot of top quarterbacks at the same time. I'm going to go deeper into that and what it means and what their general manager, Adam Peters, said yesterday on where their feelings at around the number 2 pick. A lot of stuff to discuss on today's episode, so remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show. Before I jump into the first segment, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments, use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. Using that link makes it easy for me to see your question pop up in the chat box. I can read it on air, and we can carry the conversation on that way, maybe take it in a different direction, make it more engaging, more conversational. It's a big help for the show as well as all the other shows. So again, if you would, please use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, with any of your questions or comments. We always thank you guys greatly anytime you're able to do that. But like I mentioned, jumping into the first segment, more on Bill Belichick, talking first about the 3 teams that have been reported to be his preferred landing spots in 2025. After everything around Robert Kraft and not getting the Falcons job and just all these teams that some of them are mentioned on this list I have now, why they didn't decide to go through with Bill Belichick, his character, the demeanor, the intimidation that he brings. It doesn't sit well with a lot of managers. It doesn't sit well around the league. Most recently, just because of the recent years with the Patriots. Of course, he's won all those championships, all those Super Bowls. But more recently, he hasn't been great developing coaches under him. You see Matt Patricia, Josh McDaniels, Joe Judge not having the best of success elsewhere as their own head coaches. So that on top of the Mac Jones development, how he was put into a bad situation, not really prepared the right way, plus how the Patriots performed on the field and how their draft picks really also haven't worked out too well. All of that culminated recently doesn't favor Bill Belichick in many of the jobs, regardless, like I mentioned, of how many Super Bowls he has won. But that was yesterday, and I talked about it. My feelings still stay the same. I still think he probably should have gotten a job elsewhere. I think he's going to get a job sooner rather than later. There's always coaching changes, so I think he's going to be on a lot of people's top 2, top 3 list heading into 2025. And you also have reporters from ESPN like Don Van Netta Jr., Jeremy Fowler, Seth Wickersham, saying that the 3 top teams that are favored by Belichick are probably the most likely destinations are the Philadelphia Eagles, the Dallas Cowboys, and the New York Giants. Very fond of the NFC East, and like I mentioned yesterday, I talked about that the Eagles and the Cowboys were actually on that list that had a conversation with Bill Belichick, considered him for however amount of time, but they ended up deciding not to go with him for all the reasons that I mentioned, and now they're brought up again by very credible NFL insiders, and it is something to consider, starting with the Eagles, just because in that report, in that article posted by ESPN, and other sources as well that followed today and later in the afternoon yesterday. They said that Philadelphia's owner, Jeff Lurie, and their general manager, Howie Roseman, are both fans of Bill Belichick, but others within the organization were hesitant, had a lot of their doubts that I talked about yesterday about committing to firing Nick Sirianni, even if it didn't end well last year for the Eagles and for Sirianni and his coordinators. They were still hesitant because he is writing out his contract right now. He is closer to the end of his contract, so they figured they might as well, if they will move on from him eventually, to just write out his contract and bringing in Bill Belichick right at that moment, say this offseason, and they fired Nick Sirianni. Yeah, they would have a great roster. It would be perfect for Bill Belichick, which is why them or the Eagles are the top two candidates. But with the Eagles, it would be a good situation in the short term. You'd get instant gratification from the top offense that they have, a pretty solid defense. The NFC that doesn't really have one dominant team right now. You don't know how long, even with all those positives, that Bill Belichick will end up staying. How long are they willing to give him a contract? And you still have to consider all those factors that follow Bill Belichick. You know, how much can you trust him? That was brought up a lot yesterday when I mentioned Robert Kraft and what he allegedly said to Arthur Blank, the Falcons owner. How much can you trust him to commit to a game plan that everybody agrees with in comparison to what he truly believes? How much can you pull him away and get him to change from his go-to just methods on offense, on defense, really believing in his own just scheme and strategy? The league is changing. I think teams just have to evolve, and he hasn't really done that. How much can you get him to change in that short amount of time that he might be there? That was really the biggest question for the Eagles, but he is fortunate that at the top of the hierarchy in the Eagles, their owner, their general manager, they seem to be pretty fond of him right now. That is what the feeling is around the league. So it is something to monitor if the Eagles, say, don't have a bounce back season compared to what they did last year to end the year. If they start off rough and don't have a great record halfway through the year, I think you're going to start seeing more talk, more pressure on Nick Sirianni, and more people bringing up the name of Bill Belichick in connection to the Eagles. But that's where the Eagles stand on it, not completely shutting the door there to Bill Belichick. And then you have the next likely team, the Cowboys. Again, very favorable factors in this situation for Bill Belichick. They are on the last deal of the Mike McCarthy contract. They have a great roster. Regardless of all the stuff that we've talked about around the contracts and potentially losing one of your stars, they still have a very good roster overall outside of those players. So building on that is something they have to work on, but it's still a good-looking roster. And immediately when the news of Bill Belichick being available to coach and Mike McCarthy coming off of that very bad playoff loss to the Green Bay Packers, a lot of people thought that this would be it for Mike McCarthy. How could you keep him around? I certainly did. I thought that that was the last straw. Regardless if they won or lost, if they lost by 3 points, if they lost by 3 points, it wouldn't have mattered. I would have been all right with Mike McCarthy coming back, but it's the way that they lost at home, just really not putting up a fight, not looking prepared. I didn't see a way that he could come back, but right away, Jerry Jones announced the situation. They said they were going to stick with him, and that was that. So that came to a surprise to a lot of people, and it was reported that the thought of changing so quickly, especially to a guy, bringing in a guy like Bill Belichick who just carries that power, the aura around him, historical, legendary career, legacy that he carries, it might not have been ideal for him to just walk in. The power dynamic there with Jerry Jones could have gotten a little bit awkward. They could have clashed heads on a lot of things. And you think of Jerry Jones and that organization, seeing how that all works out. He likes to be in control of a lot of things. Bill Belichick also does, so that wouldn't have really worked out too well. But again, they're not really closing the door to it yet, and they seem open to it. It is favorable, but We'll see how that ends. And then the Giants are considerable, but you think of Bill Belichick, how long will he be a head coach if he comes back in 2025? After that, this Giants team is in a long-term project. They're not one or two, even three pieces away from really, really competing. It is a thought because, the nostalgia. He was there as an assistant, won 2 Super Bowl rings. There is that connection, but it's not really favorable or realistic at this point. If it wouldn't make sense for Bill Belichick to come in there and try and rebuild this team. It's not that much better than New England, so again, you're not really improving there. So those are the 3 favorable teams that he is looking at potentially in 2025, depending on how those situations develop. And just to round this segment off, I thought another thing that I saw on Bill Belichick, he appeared on the Pat McAfee show, and he touched on some interesting topics that they talked about. He is going to be on Pat McAfee's draft show, which is going to be awesome to see Bill Belichick interact with all those guys. And they also talked about the new kickoff rule, which I thought would have been great for Bill Belichick if he was a coach to try and scheme that, prepare his guys for that on special teams. But that's not the case, obviously. But he did have something to say on the new rule, which was there will be more of an emphasis on size players in the return game than speed. You just need guys who can play at the point of attack, shed blocks, and defend their space because of the new alignment. So I think it will increase the size of the players that are on the field. He said he loves the idea of players now that can block on special teams and cover on kickoffs. That is important once again, whereas last year it really became obsolete. All the kicks went out of the end zone. Everything was a touchback. He loves the idea of that coming back. The only thing he's not a fan of is the new onside kick rule, how you have to announce it. But regardless of that, I thought it was interesting because I never really thought of it that way. I don't think a lot of people really thought that this would mean you need bigger guys out there. It's always been about speed and getting the most agile guy back there who can cause the most missed blocks and shed the most tackles. Bill Belichick is thinking of it in a different way. I thought it was really interesting that he pointed out the size of the players now and how it all develops. I think I mentioned it before when I talked about it, how I was a big fan of the new kickoff rules, making it more important now. You've seen some players go out now and sign returners like the Ravens signing Deontay Hardy, the Pittsburgh Steelers bringing in Cordell Patterson from the Falcons, one of the best returners in NFL history. Teams are taking it seriously. Bill Belichick seems to also like it, and I think it's going that way. It's going to be a big thing to watch. It's going to affect a lot of games in 2024 and into 2025. I'm excited for it. I thought Bill Belichick made a good point there. I made sure to point it out because I didn't see many people talking about it, looking at the new kickoff rule that way, and it will make a big difference, and I'm excited, looking forward to seeing that in the new season. But I will leave that conversation there, and in the meantime, we'll keep going on with the show today. A lot more to come on today's episode. I mentioned the Commanders, my quarterback list of who could be the next to win their first Super Bowl. But after the break, we're going to talk about A.J. Brown and a potential interest from the New England Patriots. They were in the market for a new number 1 wide receiver. Could they be getting close, maybe inquiring a bit further than a lot of other teams about potentially trading for A.J. Brown? I'll tell you why those rumors started to come up from yesterday and now into today. Something to keep an eye out for. I'll tell you why. Don't go anywhere. We're just getting started here today on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh,
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to jump into our next segment around A.J. Brown and the incident that caused a lot of people, a lot of Philadelphia fans, to be a little bit unhappy, confused around the whole situation that happened with A.J. Brown yesterday on his Instagram account. If you didn't notice or if you didn't see any reports or articles around this situation, A.J. Brown basically changed his profile picture to a picture of Tom Brady on his Instagram. And on top of that, he also allegedly, I didn't actually check on Instagram before I came on here, but allegedly he started following the new Patriots wide receiver, KJ Osborne, and their new/returning quarterback, Jacoby Brissett, on Instagram as well. And it's odd, just generally speaking, why would A.J. Brown have a picture of Tom Brady as his profile picture on Instagram? A little weird if there's no context, but there is a lot of background, a lot of history there. If you didn't know, A.J. Brown grew up a New England Patriots fan, and he is a huge Tom Brady fan as well. He's quoted him as saying he's his favorite player ever. He's a fan of them. And if you remember back in 2019, the Patriots were looking for a wide receiver in 2019 in the draft. Everyone almost expected them to draft one. And A.J. Brown was still on the board when they were going to pick. There was a lot of talk about him going to New England, how it would be a perfect situation for him to go there. He was looking forward to it. He expected it, talking with his agent. It all looked like it was going to fall perfectly for him to play for his favorite team. And then they ended up drafting N'Keal Harry. A.J. Brown fell to the second round, and, the rest is history with N'Keal Harry. And now you look at A.J. Brown and how much different it could have been. But in an episode of Bussin' with the Boys back a few years now, a couple years, they talked about that moment with A.J. Brown, how he felt, and he actually told them in that interview that afterwards he was so upset by it, so shocked that the Patriots didn't draft them, and how it was his favorite team and everything. He actually went home, left his draft party, and actually was pretty upset by it, cried, went home and cried because he was so upset. That was his opportunity. It was going to fall so perfect. To see it crumble and not have the Patriots backstab him or anything, but I'm sure he felt a certain type of way about it, that he was truly very upset by it. And now that is the history around that. And coming back to present day and seeing why it all connects now, he said on a post on X, he kind of explained himself around why Tom Brady was his profile pick and just addressing everybody that might have called him out, might have been nervous if you're a Philadelphia Eagles fan. He said on a Twitter post, TB12 is my favorite player ever. I watched the Dynasty, and it brought back some memories from my childhood. Go look up what he did in 2015 when he was doubted/disrespected. Yeah, I see the disrespect. Motivated, ... Yes. That's it. I did not think changing my profile picture to the greatest quarterback ever would cause controversy. Take care. A fan responded to that, just basically saying that he should have known better, that changing the picture to Tom Brady would cause a lot of people to raise their antennas and start questioning everything, to which then A.J. Brown responded again, and he said that he doesn't live by the world's rules, by anybody else's rules except his own, and that those conversation, that exchange was since deleted on X, But it did happen. It was on there, that exchange between A.J. Brown and a fan, and him basically just explaining himself to everybody, basically, if anybody got really worried with all these actions that took place, the profile picture following KJ Osborne, following Jacoby Brissett. It could raise some warning signs there, but not really those actions, but more so what came afterwards. Sports Illustrated's Albert Breer then later reported that New England had actually inquired about A.J. Brown, and they were very interested in maybe working out a deal to bring him in because, like I mentioned, they probably still are in a wide receiver market, just trying to bring in as much talent as they can. Sports Illustrated Albert Breer reported that interest from the New England Patriots, and he said specifically that Philadelphia has gotten inquiries on A.J. Brown, the Patriots being one of them, obviously. They have shut them all down, told other teams that he is not available. But the interest is there. There is some connection there. It's not like A.J. Brown did this randomly. He changed it to Tom Brady. KJ Osborne and Jacoby Brissett have now been followed, and you could sweep that all under the rug, but when it's in connection, in collaboration with the Patriots actually really being interested in A.J. Brown, then you could really see the validity in some fans, some people in Philadelphia just really become a little bit worried, a little bit flustered by seeing everything almost fall into place like this. You saw it with Brandon Ayuk, stopped following the 49ers, and just everything he's posted on social media as an example can lead you to think in this situation as well that it's sort of coming apart a little bit. There is something there that you're not seeing, but with the actions of A.J. Brown, you can see why it could lead to further talks. Now that the draft is coming up, A.J. Brown's been dealt to the Eagles in the past during the draft. People might think about that, bring it back up, and then you go down this rabbit hole of thinking, wow, like the Eagles could be really interested. Could we see something coming up in the next few days that just shocks everybody? It isn't out of the complete realm of possibility. I'll never say anything's impossible, especially around the draft where we've seen some massive surprises, A.J. Brown being traded as one of them in recent memory. But you have to remember that A.J. Brown is still only 26 years old, will be playing on the third year of that 4-year deal that he received from the Philadelphia Eagles when he got to Philadelphia after the trade. 4-year, $100 million contract back in 2022. He'll be playing on the third year of that. So you look at that, on top of all the interest from the Patriots, the activity on social media, you can see maybe a window opening where in about 2 years, 3 years even, when he's still 29, 28 years old, if it's 2 years, if the Patriots are still really interested in their situation that they're in a long-term project. So in 2 to 3 years, they're not going to be realistically competing for the AFC conference. Not a lot of teams can just turn it around like the Houston Texans just did. So it's unlikely, but again, not impossible. I don't see it as likely, but you see a window start to open up a little bit with A.J. Brown. His contract is not running out, but it is just not that far away, where the Patriots could, if they're really interested, could come back again around that time, expiring contract, and really push the button of the Philadelphia Eagles and see how far they're willing to go to deal A.J. Brown at some point. I don't think it's realistic right now to settle the nerves of any Philadelphia fan watching or just knowing of this report of all these actions. It probably wouldn't happen right now, because if there was ever a chance it could be done, it would be just in a couple of years, like I mentioned with the contract. And if you look at it now, everyone's talking about the Patriots and how they would rebuild this team and really make it a contender, build it up the right way. You wouldn't do that by trading for a guy like A.J. Brown, 2 years left on his contract. And it wouldn't make sense if you bring a wide receiver who's going to be throwing him the ball. Jacoby Brissett's there, but that's not going to make an exponential change, an exponential improvement to this team where it stands right now. And if you want to just talk basically just trade and what the Patriots would probably have to give up, the Eagles would probably ask for nothing less than that number 3 overall pick and maybe even more, another pick or so in the later rounds or 4th round, 3rd round for A.J. Brown because of how prolific he is. He's in the top 5, top 7 wide receivers right now, just off the top of my head. To give him up, the Patriots are going to have to give up a lot, and it's just too expensive for them right now, realistically. It doesn't make too much sense for a new head coach, new general manager in there to make this sort of trade. It just seems too impulsive to me. It's okay to have that interest, but to just go out and do it without really thinking about all the options. I'm sure they are, which is why I don't think this will happen. But again, it just seems too impulsive, too in the moment. It is funny how it all lines up with the interest and the actions from A.J. Brown, but it shouldn't be taken too seriously. It is just something that caught the eye of a lot of fans and a lot of reporters and just media members in general out there because you're talking about one of the best wide receivers. The Patriots are certainly in the market of trying to get better. No doubt A.J. Brown would make them better, but thinking long-term, is this the piece that you need right now at this moment? Probably not. The receivers they have already aren't world-changing, aren't game-changers in a way, but Kendrick Bourne is a very solid receiver. You still have Juju Smith-Schuster there. You were able to bring back Hunter Henry, and you have a very good offensive line running game that I'm sure they're going to try and build off of. It doesn't make sense to give up so much right now for A.J. Brown, but it is certainly something that caught a lot of people's eye. But in the end, like I mentioned, it isn't something to really take too seriously right now. With the draft coming up, I'm sure a lot of talk will be made with the Patriots and them not really focusing too much on this, but around their number 3 pick and what they're going to end up doing. We're less than a week away from the first round of the NFL draft, so more of that conversation, trades, fits, rumors, just movement all around the draft. It's going to start to really heat up in the next coming days, over the weekend, I'm sure. So we're going to sit tight and just hold out to see what happens, what else we can talk about moving forward. But mentioning that, we will move forward with the show, put a pin in that conversation, and go into our second break. But we still have more segments to talk about on the other side of that. The Washington Commanders and what they're going to do with the number 2 overall pick, as well as me providing my top 5 list of the quarterbacks I think who are most likely to win their first Super Bowl out of the current NFL quarterbacks playing right now. I'll give you that list in just a few seconds. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Continuing on with today's show, we're going to go into our third segment of today's episode, but to remind you guys one last time, if you have any questions or comments you want to make during any of the segments, please use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. I mentioned it is a way for me to see your questions pop up in my chat box. I can read them on air and then carry the conversation elsewhere, make it more engaging. It's more fun for me that way, and it's also a big help for the show as well as all the other shows across the network. So again, the tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. If you were able to use that with any question or comments, we greatly appreciate it. But in saying that, moving on to the next topic, my top 5 list of the quarterbacks I believe have the best chance of winning their next Super Bowl. Where is this coming out of? Why did I decide to do this on today's episode? Well, if you remember a few days ago, I mentioned that episode of Deep Cut, a barber podcast style show with the host being Vic Blends, an influencer slash barber, had Tom Brady on his show, asked him more famously where we talked about Tom Brady mentioning him not closing the door to retirement. He also talked about the next quarterback he really likes to win his first Super Bowl, to which Tom Brady responded that he really liked Josh Allen. Even with the departures of Stephon Diggs and everything like that, he still believes in Josh Allen as one of them, probably the most likely for him to get it done and win their first Super Bowl. So that got me thinking, that's a good choice to pick. You can't go wrong with Josh Allen. He is one of the best quarterbacks, very talented, can win you games just on his own. And then it got me thinking of who else could be on that list. There's a lot of great quarterbacks in the NFL, ranging from different ages to different play styles, skill sets. There's really a lot that you can pick from. I narrowed it down to 5, and there were some tough decisions I had to make, honestly, because there are too many good quarterbacks that I had to leave some off. To start, my honorable mentions on this list: Justin Herbert, honorable mention; Jared Goff, honorable mention; Jordan Love, also a bit too young in my opinion to really be considered one of the favorites. Trevor Lawrence as well, a little bit more experience, but his team's still lacking something. I don't know exactly what, but it just feels like maybe another receiver, obviously. Something on defense as well. They don't seem like a solidified, guaranteed team to even make the playoffs at this point, so I couldn't include Trevor Lawrence. And surprisingly, I just hyped up Josh Allen. I like him as a quarterback. He is very talented, but it's not Josh Allen, it's me. Their team, I just think, lost too many pieces to me. I've mentioned before the departures on defense. Stephon Diggs is huge. Not to say that they're not going to address it in the draft, but to meet it where Josh Allen is in his career, trying to continue this train that they're on, this journey of reaching the playoffs, to try and get guys to buy in, it all has to fall so perfectly in the NFL to battle against injuries. The transition period, it has to go smoothly for a lot of these players that they're going to be drafting, a lot of new players that they're going to expect to be starters. It just seems too perfect to happen sooner than any of these other guys I have on this list. So, unfortunately, I don't agree with Tom Brady. I couldn't include Josh in my top 5. So, in saying that, I will start with number 5. My number 5 on this list is Joe Burrow. And my reasoning for him is quite simple. He's the only quarterback to beat Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs since 2019. Cincinnati finished without a winning record without him this year, or just in the past. And this year, I think they were 9-8. And they were just all right. You can see that they were in games a lot because they do have a lot of great players on their team. They were obviously missing their all-world quarterback to beat them, to get them over the hump in those tough games. They've reached the AFC Championship game each time Joe Burrow has played at least 16 games and basically just been healthy heading into the playoffs. So I don't think that is just a coincidence. He makes the difference for them. And I think the biggest thing right now with T. Higgins sort of having a change of heart, this could be the year that they go all in, funny enough, with the Bengals. This could be the last year of T. Higgins, so they could see it as extra motivation to get the most out of T. Higgins, this core group that they have. If they're going to lose T. Higgins, they might as well make it the best year that they have. I anticipate them, again, being in that conversation around the top teams in the AFC. So there's more incentive there, I think, internal incentive to perform there. Their defense is all right. It's good enough to get them timely stops when they need it, and they improve the offensive line with Trent Brown. I think Joe Burrow is in an adequate position to win his first Super Bowl. Then, moving on to number 4, a guy that just edged him out, I think is Jalen Hurts. He is my number 4 on this list. He is basically in a prove-it year, if you want to call it that, a critical year, a make-or-break year, whatever label you want to call it. They were the number 2 seed with a poor defense. They resolved all their coordinator dilemmas now. They brought in Kellen Moore to kind of command that offense now that is stacked up with all the talent that they need. Like I mentioned, they figured out the coordinators. They brought in this talent. They still have work to do on defense, but offense should not be the issue as to why they're struggling to put up points. They've struggled to score in the red zone over the last few years, so that's something they have to figure out. And with everything being changed and resolved basically on offense, the only thing you still have there that you can look at as a possible reason why it's not working could end up being Jalen Hurts. Hopefully, with this criticism and the added pressure now, especially to Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts, like I just mentioned, it could sort of boost them up and just get them to click and really hone in on taking advantage of all this talent, because not many teams around the league can say they have a surplus at wide receiver, one of the best running backs, a very good tight end, a great offensive line. Jalen Hurts, I'm a believer in him. Rough year, but I think truly that he is a great quarterback. So that, the addition of Saquon, more help on defense, I'm sure they're going to address it. Mainly just edge rusher depth, secondary help, and linebacker. Similar to Cincinnati, even though they need positions on defense, I think that their defense is solid enough as it is right now to get them stops with the offense that they've built up. I think it's good enough to get them through tough games if Jalen Hurts and this offense can click. That's the biggest thing. I expect Jalen Hurts to bounce back. And one of the biggest things, just lastly on Jalen Hurts, is that this core group of guys, Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown, Mailata, Dickerson, Hurts, they're all signed for the next 3 to 4 years. So they're really entering their prime years of this Super Bowl window that everybody talks about. I think it starts now. I think they have a bounce back year. He's my number 4. But again, he doesn't edge out my number 3, who is Brock Purdy. I just think the 49ers team is in a better spot than the Eagles are right now. They are one of the only teams in the NFC, maybe the only team in the NFC that can compete toe-to-toe on offense with the Eagles. Quarterback, whatever your opinion is on Brock Purdy, stat-wise, he had a great year last year. Better numbers than Jalen Hurts in some categories, so you can pick either or there just based on the year they had last year. 2 of the best running backs, McCaffrey and Saquon, Debo, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Brandon Ayuk. It is a heavyweight fight if these teams meet up in the playoffs yet again this coming year. So the offense really isn't the issue. The defense is where the 49ers, I just think, have the edge with Fred Warner, Drake Greenlaw, I expect to come back, Travarius Ward. I just think they have a very solid, solidified core group of guys just doing it all over again, running it back. I expect Brock Purdy to be better. The only thing they really just have to figure out is the Brandon Ayuk situation. If they bring him back, then they're just running it back with the same starters that they had in the Super Bowl. I think it's too many times that they've gotten unlucky and just not gotten it done. They're going to get it done eventually. They are stacked up on offense and defense. I think it's only just a matter of time before they get their first Super Bowl in I don't remember how many years. Get Brock Purdy his first Super Bowl. It's more favorable to me. I trust it more than I do the Eagles, so Brock Purdy is my number 3. Then heading into the top 2, a little bit of the surprise here at number 2, but I'm sticking with it. I've officially jumped on this train, the Houston Texans train. I have C.J. Stroud as the second quarterback most likely to win a Super Bowl on my list. I talked about Super Bowl era, Super Bowl window with the Eagles heading into their prime Super Bowl window now with all their players. I think this could just be the start of this Super Bowl window for the Texans, which is why I have CJ Stroud so high, because he's only just starting to start this journey that they could go on for the next 3 to 5 years. He's only going to be in his second year. Tank Dell's going to be in his second year. Nico Collins is still young. Bring in Joe Mixon, a young head coach. Their defense is great, adding pieces on that side of the ball. Last year was not so serious. It was a lot easier in a way because nobody really had expectations for them. The pressure wasn't really there. And that's really the main concern now in the second year jump that you mentioned with some of these guys, some of these players, some of these teams, that it was easy the first year because nobody really knew what to expect. There was no game plan around you. Now seeing how they adjust to that, coaches, coordinators really scheming for their weaknesses and trying to exploit them, that's really where you see the maturity of this team. And I mentioned they have a lot of young players, so they're going to have to maneuver that and gain that experience. There's definitely going to be some bad, ugly games this year, but I think because there is so much untapped potential on this team, they're just on the start of that journey, like I mentioned. CJ Stroud impressed everybody, one of the best rookie seasons in NFL history. I'm really liking what they did. They don't think twice about the moves that they make, at least this offseason. It just seemed like they were dead set on improving. They lost a player here, fine, we're going to go and replace him with this other player. It just seems like they know what they have in-house, and they have to take advantage of it. That mentality, combining it with a quarterback that you were fortunate to find in that draft and have him be your franchise guy, it all lines up well. That's why I have CJ Stroud so high. And then to just round it off, I had to have Lamar Jackson on this list. I haven't mentioned him all episode. He is my number one. He is on the thumbnail of this video, so that sort of gave it away. He has been in that conversation talent-wise with Patrick Mahomes, how special he is, his ability to run the ball. They were the number one seed in the AFC last year. Then you just go and add Derrick Henry, one of the best running backs. Even if the conversation is around not having a top wide receiver, it's not in their nature to really have one. Honestly, with this conversation of Lamar having a true weapon like that, it almost doesn't complement what he does best. You saw them trying to throw the ball in that AFC Championship against the Chiefs, and everybody afterwards was questioning why they went away from who they were, running the ball. They were one of the best teams at doing that. And I just think having a top wide receiver would take this team out of their comfort zone. You have to just use Derrick Henry and use Lamar as much as you can to the best of their abilities. So I don't think a number one wide receiver is necessary. I think they prove that. The biggest question for me is trying to address that offensive line and defense. They lost a few pieces on that O-line, so you have to get that figured out. 2, take advantage of Derrick Henry and everything that he can provide for you. But I trust that they're going to do that. I'm sure they're going to do that. And then on defense as well, you lost Patrick Queen, Geno Stone, good pieces, starters on that defense. So plugging those guys in, it is fortunate that they only had really those 2 guys leave. I love the development of Kyle Hamilton. He really burst onto the scene in his first year. They're as well in a great position now where everyone is really entering or is already in their prime years. Same with Lamar. Just talent-wise, development-wise, you see where he's gone from where he started to where he is now. It's a great jump. It's a perfect example of taking a quarterback late, developing him, sitting him for a year or 2, and then turning him into something like this. I think he's got the best chance to win a Super Bowl, his first Super Bowl out of this list. So that's my list. That's who I have from 5 to 1, with Lamar Jackson rounding it off there. I'd love to know what you guys think about it. If you want to leave it in the chat box on this episode, throughout the remainder of this episode, feel free to do that, or leave it in the comments as well. I would love to know what you guys think. If I got the order wrong, if you think somebody else should be on there, let me know all your guys' thoughts in the comments below. But we'll be moving on to the last segment of the show, talking about the draft and the Washington Commanders, what they're going to do with that number 2 overall pick, how close are they to making a final decision on it. Their general manager, Adam Peters, talked about it yesterday. I'm going to tell you all that he said and my reactions to it as well. So stick around. That will just be coming up in a few seconds. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Back here on the show to talk about the last segment, all having to do with the Washington Commanders and what they're going to do with that number 2 overall pick. Really, in a way, the start of the draft is at number 2 because of Caleb Williams going number 1. I think that's written in stone already. So really, the draft is going to start with this pick, and when everybody thought that it was going to be Jaden Daniels, it's 100% going to be him. He's the most talented after Caleb Williams. He just won the Heisman. It has to be him just based on the season that he had. It might not be so cut and dry just because of all the just trail of events that has happened this week. Starting on Tuesday, I made a YouTube short about this, but it was so unusual and I loved it, but it was just, I've never really seen this happen or be talked about this much with the Commanders and just with any team really in general. On Tuesday, as I mentioned, they had 4 quarterback prospects in to visit them for the last time, I presume, before the NFL draft. Those 4 quarterbacks were J.J. McCarthy, Michael Penix, Jaden Daniels, and Drake May. Having them on top of a much larger group of prospects as well, around 20, maybe even more, that were all there to visit the Commanders' facilities, take the tour, have the interviews, and all that stuff. You usually see it go one by one by one. That's usually the traditional way of doing things. Some teams have done this before in the group aspect. The Commanders have done it. Bill Belichick, I saw he mentioned that the Patriots have done it as well. So it has been done elsewhere. Adam Peters, it was mentioned that he sort of brought this idea over from the 49ers that they also still do it or they used to do it. But I just thought it was so unorthodox to bring these top 4 quarterbacks in because of really the conversation around all these quarterbacks. One day it's J.J. McCarthy who's going to go number 2. Another day, everyone's impressed by Drake May's pro day, so he's got a chance to be number 2. Like I mentioned, Jaden Daniels just won the Heisman. How could it not be him? And Michael Penix made it to the national championship, impressing everybody on top of his pro day as well. He could be a sneaky candidate to be up there. So all these guys were just talked about constantly around the top picks, top 3, top 2. To bring them in all at the same time, there had to be some weird, awkward tension there. I can't imagine what it was like to be one of these quarterbacks trying to maneuver and try to get used to everybody being around there. And I couldn't imagine what it was like for the Commanders to try and coordinate this whole big group of players that were in there to see, maybe who was the alpha, who stood out of all those prospects, how they interact with their peers. That's really the main thing that Adam Peters, the Commanders general manager, wanted to get out of this. And they asked him about it when he was talking with media yesterday on this sort of method. And he said, what's cool is we got to see them all together in a group setting. They all got a lot of time individually with coaches and with us. They were staggered coming in too. It was a great blend of that and working everyone together in a fun environment. So he obviously is a fan of this. He likes seeing everyone get together. And he made it sound pretty positive and pretty flawless just from his point of view. And I'm sure talking with everybody. But what was interesting, now comes the sort of conspiracy, sort of rumors and who do you trust, what do you believe, and whatnot, because afterwards, after this new method was discussed around and gained some more media attention, it actually didn't sit well with Jaden Daniels' agent. He commented on X. He replied to a post made on X on just with an emoji, the thinking emoji, the scratching chin emoji that just has a puzzled look on its face. He commented that on a post by NBC Sports, I believe, of them talking about this and how it all went and stuff like that, just basically breaking it down like I did. And later on, ESPN's Adam Schefter went on to mention that, yeah, this just didn't sit well with Jaden Daniels' agent. He commented on it on social media, and he believes that Jaden Daniels' thought around that visit was that he was going to go in for the visit just himself. And then you could kind of understand when you think it's going to be just you, then you have all these prospects there, not to mention all the other quarterbacks that are in contention for this pick at number 2, how that might not sit well with Jaden Daniels, according to what Adam Schefter reported on what the sort of feeling he was getting back from Jaden Daniels' agent, saying that it didn't sit well with the agent and that it just caught Jaden Daniels off guard to be in that scenario. And also, on top of that, it also seemed just when you bring all these quarterbacks in, you bring in all these prospects, you can't help but think that it's sort of still wide open, if you bring in this many prospects a week before the draft, that the Commanders haven't really made a decision, and it's much more open than a lot of people think. With doing something like this and evaluating their options at number 2, I'm sure they want to be 100% 10 toes in on that this guy is the guy. But if you're thinking of it like Jaden Daniels, and one, you're caught off guard by being surrounded by a lot more people than you thought, and I don't know how the meetings went prior to this with the Commanders and how he thought their conversation came about and how he felt about it, but I'm sure he must have thought at some point in his head that the Commanders were going to make him the pick. He probably felt great about their meetings and their just talks that they've had before. When you feel pretty confident about it, feeling good after that, and then you're sure, probably in his mind, that he's going to be picked number 2, and then just a week before the draft, you have another meeting, you think it's going to be one-on-one again, just to reassure everything. You see a bunch of other players in there, all the other quarterbacks in there, and you have to have some doubt in your mind creep in. So that's really where the problem starts and where this sort of doesn't fall great with Jaden Daniels and his camp. And then this morning, ESPN's Get Up were talking about it, and funny enough, after this method was talked about, after Jaden Daniels, after the meeting with the Commanders, met with the Minnesota Vikings of all teams, a team that's been talked about moving up in the draft, ESPN had the odds of Jaden Daniels going at number 2 initially when the odds first came out at minus 350, whereas Drake May was at plus 240, and then it switched dramatically because at noon yesterday at 5 p.m., Jaden Daniels was still favored at minus 180, and Drake May was at plus 120. And now today, with more time to sit on this whole development, this morning, I haven't checked it since then, but this morning, Jaden Daniels' odds of going number 2 dropped to minus 125, and Drake May surpassing him at minus 110. So you have now the odds shifting so drastically in a short amount of time. You have the agent now saying that it didn't sit well with Jaden Daniels, that the Commanders were doing something like this. And then, like I just talked about, he meets yesterday after the Tuesday-Wednesday group meeting with the Commanders. He meets yesterday with the Minnesota Vikings, a team that has been talked about trying to find a trade partner to move up. Now, to see them going to number 2 might be asking for a lot, but we are at that point, most of all, where you can't sit well on these executives, general managers, coaches saying one thing where their actions might show another thing. That's when it all gets confusing. It all gets a bit fishy with what you hear Adam Peters say, and then with their actions speak louder than words. I truly believe that, and I can't see them being so convinced on Jaden Daniels if they're still having these sort of meetings like this. And on that topic of just being decided on a pick, being convinced about a prospect, further in that media scrum that Adam Peters had yesterday, he went on to say in his sort of closing statement of the just period that the media had with them, he said, "We feel great about staying at number 2. I don't see a lot of scenarios trading down. We're really close on making a decision. Still a few more things in the process. We don't need to make a decision until we need to make a decision. There's no rush with that. We'll probably have a good idea what we're doing early next week." So if there was any doubt about them knowing who they're going to pick, just the way he lays it out, it seems that they're still really evaluating their options. And if that's the case, with the odds shifting like that, I don't want to say 100% that it's not going to be Jaden Daniels. But again, it is odd how all of these things sort of just line up in this sort of conspiracy theory sort of just situation you have going on here. All the clues, all the context point to them shifting away from Jaden Daniels. Adam Peters said it himself. He's not sure who they're going to be picking yet. Probably early next week at the earliest, but it is just weird how it all lines up right now. And just my thoughts on all this overall to close this segment and wrap up the show. I mentioned at the start of this, I thought this method was really interesting. I actually love the idea of seeing this, but I can again see why Jaden Daniels would be caught off guard and just be put off a little bit by the idea of Washington doing this so close to the draft and almost seeming like they're backpedaling on their decision, maybe on drafting Jaden Daniels. If that ever was a final decision made by them, you don't know. Jaden Daniels might have felt a certain way about it, but the Commanders really never thought that it would be Jaden Daniels to start with, so there is some contrasting points there. And just in general, the visit, this sort of group meeting could have been scheduled way ahead of time, so this could just be being blown out of proportion in reality, but it is weird how it just wasn't lining up well, how Daniels wasn't pleased by it. And then meeting with Minnesota, that's sort of where it gets a little bit past the point of just being a weird coincidence. And then the odds changing, plus Adam Peters saying there's no decision made. This could be just swaying it away from Jaden Daniels in a way. And just recently, with Washington and New England, with Minnesota seeming just to be pushing hard to trade up to get their franchise quarterback, it still seems pretty open. New England and Washington seem to be like the biggest contenders for it. There were the Cardinals, there were the Commanders, but I think that's died off a little bit. More so with the Cardinals, I think they're planning to stay put, at least not trading with the Minnesota Vikings. It seems like the Vikings, the Patriots, and the Commanders are all going to be locked with each other until the day of the draft, maybe even during the first round, to see if they can work out a deal. The Chargers, the Cardinals could trade, but that could come maybe with the Giants or something like that. That's been rumored. But in all reality, with this whole situation, I think, one, it's too expensive for the Vikings to move up that high. Adam Peters says he doesn't feel like they're going to trade, so it seems like they're going to make the pick anyway. It just comes down whether or not it's going to be Jaden Daniels, what the decision's going to be made after all this time of people thinking it has to be Jaden Daniels. This just has cracked open the door a little bit more. And saying everything like this, laying it all out, I love it. This is probably the best part of the NFL draft. You really, truly don't know what's going to happen at all so early on in the draft. Usually you know top 3, what's going to happen, what the general feeling is. I feel like this draft, on top of all the other ones, has that more unexpected, unpredictable feeling that we haven't really seen too much in recent memory. And I love it. I think it's going to be a great draft. I'm excited to be surprised, be unexpected by some news that drops. It's going to be great. The draft is going to be here before we know it, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to be talking about it a lot more as the day goes on. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more breaking news to talk about, so very excited to talk about that. But for now, that will do it for today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I want to give a big thank you to you guys for tuning in and watching today's episode. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show as well. And make sure to also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok for more of the network's content. If you want to see more of me and this show, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel, where YouTube Shorts are always posted each weekday. The full live recorded shows are all on there for you to go back and watch, as well as individual segment videos. If you just want to go back and watch a certain part of a whole show, or you missed a certain part, they're all on there as well. Tune in every weekday, again at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, for more draft talk, football conversations, and just talk around the NFL with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you guys once again for joining me, and I hope to see you guys all back here on Monday. Have a great weekend.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.